Hello, lovely people. How are you? Welcome back to another cup of joy with Liz and Lane. We are steady mobbing through. We're almost at a year, Lane.
I know.
We're going to talk to you guys
Crazy.
all about that in a couple weeks, but turn down for what? I'm starting the celebration early, and I will not talk about why I'm so excited about it today because that is not why we're here. But today we are in the professional well being lane for all you professionals, which is everyone we're talking to, which includes career and finance. Today, we are in the career space. Yes, Lane?
Yes, we're in career and we're talking about what we called the soap opera of the workplace, which I think we all know what that means as soon as I said it. Most of our workplaces, whether they are remote or whether you're in a traditional kind of office environment or whatever your office looks like, whatever your workplace looks like, there's going to be some drama. That's just how it is. And drama, conflict, whatever you want to call it. I feel like conflict is kind of like the workplace conflict is like the corporate
It's a
version of just
professional way
like,
to say beef.
yeah,
We
basically,
got
yeah.
beef at work.
So that's what we're talking about today. How do we, navigate that? Just as we, just as I said that, I just realized, one of the things we didn't talk about in our like prep for this episode was just that like a lot of people do like really like workplace drama. And I think that that's
Mm.
a conversation that's relevant here too is, a lot of us are like, oh, I hate all the drama or something, but
Mhm.
like, really do you? Because every time you hear about something, you kind of invest in it or you get a little more like intrigued. And then, it's
Mm.
something you talk about all the time and you're just invested in a way that like makes me question if maybe you
Look, Lane coming for y'all. We ain't even 2 minutes in. She skipped to the end. We're going to talk about what's really going on here right now. Go ahead, Lane. Get them together.
Yeah, like I mean that's something I'm not like trying to judge because honestly like I get it. It is sometimes like very entertaining. Like it is very it'll break up the day in ways that I think that people need sometimes. You need something to like get you like if your job isn't feeling super exciting then like maybe the drama will kind of bring some energy. But the really like the reason for this conversation is just to kind of like give some suggestions and tips and figure out what is really behind some of these like I don't know whatever you want to call it conflict or drama or the soap opera stuff like what is behind it and how can we you know
How can we level up unless
how
we
can
want to
we
maintain the entertainment source that it is?
yeah and so yeah and a lot of us probably are kind of done with that because there's plenty of us where it's like some of these conflicts and I'll kind of give you some ideas of examples and stuff but some of these conflicts do cause us to feel to dread going to work sometimes they do cause us to just become burnt out with our job because it's
Mhm.
just exhausting to deal with you're not you want to go and do your job you don't want to go
Mhm.
and deal with
The
the
BS.
the
Let
behaviors
me
of
say it,
other
Lane.
people.
The BS.
The BS, yeah. So just to give some examples, some different types of conflicts. One of the statistics I found is that 49% of workplace conflicts are clashes between personalities or egos, and we'll talk more about that later on. But that's just that makes sense to me. Just thinking back on like conflicts I've like witnessed or been around in work, and I think personality clash is just like a big reason. And
Mhm.
some of the other more common ones are just workplace stress. So people stressed, they tend to take it out on each other sometimes. Too much work without enough support, poor leadership, dishonesty, or not enough openness. And so that's like a cultural thing, like of a workplace. So
Mhm.
so that those are just some examples. There's plenty more. And the other statistic I wanted to share that just kind of was part of the reason why we're doing this is because the question of how do people most commonly handle conflict, 89% of people let the conflict escalate. That's how they handle it. There's not like there's not anything else that they do. They just let it escalate. And I think
Well, and let me just
yeah,
interject here. That's really not that. It's not. That's not what they do. What they do is do nothing,
what they do is do
right?
nothing. Yeah.
Right. So it's not you're going out and say, "I'm going to
This
let
is
that
a way
escalate."
of
You're
saying you're
going
doing
to do
nothing.
nothing. That's
Yeah.
code for I'm not going to do anything. Right.
Exactly. So like
Okay.
that's the point of like maybe it's time to stop doing nothing and maybe there is something that you actually can do about some of this stuff that goes on at work. Yeah. So Liz, what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to hit on a couple other stats you didn't cover because even
Okay.
on that 89% lets conflict escalate, then we also have this stat of 67% took extra measures to avoid a colleague with whom
Mm-hmm.
they had a disagreement, which is a little more or less, however you want to see it, than doing nothing, right? You're going out of your way to avoid it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I wanted to go back up. 85% of US employees have some level of conflict. So in case you thought this was just you or just your raggedy coworkers or just your raggedy organization, because a lot of times when you talk to people about stuff like this, they tend to think it's just them. I wanted everyone to know this is a thing. It's almost like a guarantee kind of a thing,
Yeah.
right? And I wanted to give the stat you talked about, Lane, that folks it leads to stress and anxiety and maybe even depression. But this stat had
Yeah.
56% of people um, had it lead to that. So why do we need to lean into this? I think that stat, if 85%, which is nearly all of us, are dealing with conflict, and of those people, which is almost all of us, at least more than half of us, this is going to lead to stress, anxiety, or depression, then my first thought is let us challenge ourselves to not normalize this in the sense of this is just how it is and I'm not going to do something about it, because even though we don't have a stat, we do have a nerd who is me. And I would propose to you that if we looked hard enough, we would probably find a stat that one of the reasons why it would lead to a level of stress, anxiety, or depression that's measurable is because you either let it escalate, or that you didn't do anything about it, which could include or try to avoid it, right? Which is now you've created a lifestyle where you have to avoid this person all the time, and it's
Yeah.
like work and life are already hard. Now you have another job amongst all your other roles, which is to avoid the people who you got beef with, right?
Right. Right.
And or just have that tension continue to escalate. And so, Lane, I didn't think to have you grab the stat, but it's an insane percent of people who just don't deal with quote unquote conflict well. And I don't like
Yeah.
the word conflict because it has
Yeah.
sort of a connotation of assuming negativity, but let's just double click on that word for a minute. Like, we're all humans and every single one of us is different. Even if you have an identical twin, you and your twin are different, right? And
Mhm.
so conflict just simply means that there's some difference, right? It's not necessarily beef. And so to know that so many people avoid conflict, it's got to be right up there with the fear of public speaking. Like, we all know that stat. Most of us have
Yeah.
heard, like, people are more scared to speak than to die. And I would think that facing conflict is right up there with it. And we're in the career professional sphere today, but you could certainly double this over to any of your relationships with another human being, in which, because they're different, you're going to have difference slash
Mhm.
conflict. And so that's the thing that comes to mind for me, is that A, this happens so often. B, people I think normalize it. And C, they're like, I would rather just not do anything, which means this is likely going to get worse, which means my life is going to get harder, than to address it. And I think about for myself in personal and work life, like when because I know I'm weird, but I don't enjoy it. I appreciate when there is a conflict. I appreciate being able to address it and talk ASAP about it. I know that it's not that I don't get the little yuck feeling in my stomach like you guys get too, which probably is part of why you're like, I know I'm not. And again, this we could be talking work or personal in this. We could talk about your husband or wife or your boo or your kids or whatever. But like the fact is that in general, we don't communicate when there's a quote unquote problem or a difference or some sort of misalignment, disalignment, lack of alignment. And as a result, inevitably, whatever is the problem is guaranteed to get worse because we don't want to talk about it. And so I just want to call out to everyone the importance of challenging yourself to be willing to lean into hard conversations, which, by the way, if you've ever done this, you will start to see that a lot of times it's not even that big of a deal. And they're like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize you were thinking that. I'm so glad you brought it to my attention. I totally didn't even mean it like that," or whatever. Or, "You know what? I knew you were having a bad day, so I didn't even take that personal. But you were over here like, this has been 3 weeks," and you're like, "She don't even want," and you know what I mean? Like, it's become this monster. And it's really because I would say more than anything, the idea that we might not get along or we might have a difference, we would just rather not talk about it. So that's the first thing that comes to me, Lane, is like, before
Yeah.
we get into our really deep notes of the things we would cover, right? Like, just the part about, like, can we start leaning into the discomfort of being uncomfortable
Right.
so that we can like, do you know how many problems we would not have if we just did this in any area of life? Thoughts, Lane?
Right. Yeah, I think that that is one of the really commonly dreaded things. People hate that, and I hate that. Like, I'm not speaking just like other people. Like, I don't enjoy, and I don't really know that there are people that enjoy it. It's not something that is like fun, but it is, and it's harder than the opposite, which we've seen most people do, which is nothing. So
I
it's the
would
harder
argue it's harder
thing.
to not do something because ultimately it gets harder, like, it gets
It
worse.
gets hard. It
So it's
gets
an inaccurate assessment of how hard, because
it
it's
is.
easier in the moment to not say,
Right. Well, and
but
I think
long
that's a theme in a lot of our stuff where it's like
term.
we talked about a few weeks ago how like with physical health, like people put that off because they don't have the money for it. But really, if you put off your physical health, you'll be spending way more money later down the road on some
Right.
other physical health issue. So
Yep, yep,
it's the
yep.
same kind of thing. It's like delayed gratification in some ways. So
Mhm.
it's just, yeah, one of those things that like I think is a learned skill that like if you want to have a better experience at work, then you probably need to learn that, because like you can level up in your career all you want, but if you're still like kind of caught up in these dramas all the time, and like, you know, if that's a thing that's like consistent for you at work like it is for most of us, then like it might be time to evaluate, you know, what would that look like if you didn't have that going on. And I think
Yeah.
like a lot of us don't even ask that question. Again, we think it's so, well, to your point, you were like, I think it's just me. A lot of people say I think it's just me or something, but a lot of people also like assume that that's just everywhere and everyone, and is everyone's experiencing this kind of drama, and everyone's workplace
Yeah.
like this, and there's not an example of what it looks like without that. So I think like the question would be like, what is it, what does it look like without that? What would it feel like for you?
Mhm.
Like, what would waking up and going into work feel like if you didn't have the this kind of like negative energy, which we can all agree that like whether you feel stressed or anxious or depressed about it is up for debate, but like
Mhm.
it is negative. Like
Yeah.
we're not talking about things that feel positive for us. So
And I'm realizing as we're talking, Lane, there's kind of two camps here. There's the camp who really for real does not want to deal with conflict. And so they're just, if
yeah,
something came up, they're trying to avoid it. And they may not realize that something they did is part of the problem. Maybe someone has beef with the fact that they're not much communicators, and so
yeah,
they're bringing conflict upon themselves, or not upon themselves, but they're part of the facilitation of it because they are so quiet and
yeah,
communicative or whatever. And then the other camp would be the people who, whether you realize it or own it or not, you're like kind of here for the drama. And I don't think anyone's running around saying I love drama, except if it's a TV show. But not to be
yeah. Well,
judgmental or
I don't
anything,
know.
but if you
I
are
haven't
someone
heard
who loves those
that.
dramatic TV
Yeah.
shows, you may be someone who also appreciates drama in life, but you're saying, or at work, but you're saying that you don't. So anyway, love y'all. Like, don't DM me. I'm just saying, I'm trying to help y'all. We're here for you, right? So
Yeah,
either
'cause
way, I
yeah.
know, Lane, we found this, and I think I've heard of this in back in the day when I was working in the corporate streets. This 5-step thing shindig.
Yeah.
Lane, you want to go over that?
Yeah, so we yeah, this is just kind of like a conflict resolution method. So not every step is relevant in every conversation, but you know, if we because something that we did discuss is that there are like two very distinct differences in how a conflict should be handled, which is the difference there is like if it's something that you should be working on internally and versus something that you actually have a reason to be communicating with another person or another group of people about. And so in this case, these 5 steps are more relevant if you were communicating with a group of people or another person
To
external to
try to address
yourself
it.
to try to address something that's going on. So the 5 steps are assessment, acknowledgement, attitude, action, and analysis. And so we'll kind of break those down. But so yeah, Liz, you want to kind of start off with assessment as what we
Yeah, so we'll go over these and then we really want to spend more time because if you've gotten to this point where you would roll these out, then I would say you probably should this is a level where it's probably going to make sense that you have talked to someone else,
yeah.
slash your supervisor slash someone else in the organization if it's to this level. But maybe not. But assessment is really just the idea of like sitting down together and saying like, how did we get here? What's going on? You know, where could there be a compromise
Mm-hmm.
uh, to be able to kind of move forward. Then the second one is acknowledgement, which is just hearing each other out, which this is definitely in any communication, which this is really a communication solution. Communication as a solution to conflict. And so anytime you have, again, so much of this, we're talking about workplace, but you could literally ditto all of this to any relationship you have, whether it's your spouse or kids or whatever. But just acknowledging the other party, hear them out and have empathy towards however they're showing up or whatever they're saying has been problematic for them. Um, and really encouraging the other party to, share how they feel, right? So that you can acknowledge it. And I know this is really hard when if you feel like the other party is so freaking far to the left from what's really real in your mind, then you're not going to be encouraging them to share more of what you would call BS. It's not even how it happened, right? But if you really want to get to solution, you should want to not only know how they feel, but you should be in position to accept that that's how they feel, even if you don't agree, which is part of the third A, which is attitude, right? Which is like thinking about how you show up in a way, um, and how you show up, right? So acknowledging too that everyone shows up differently from a cultural perspective, from a gender tendency perspective. And so you even on the culture part of like you can think ethnicity, but even from like from a global perspective, with us having a global workplace now, you may have a scenario where the the way someone else is showing up to a conversation to try to resolve something, if they're from a collective culture, which is
Yeah.
typically not found in the United States, right? Then
More
they're going to
Eastern.
show up
Mhm.
differently than the US culture, which tends to be individualistic, for example, where
Yeah.
we're really like, we don't see any problem with showing up saying how we feel. In collective cultures, it is expected that you would show up in a yielding manner. And so you got to be careful with that kind of stuff because someone might be yielding to you because it's part of their culture, but it's not necessarily because you haven't offended them or you're not presenting a problem for them. They're just their culture doesn't celebrate individualistic, expressive type responses like we tend to do in the United States.
Right.
And you want to
Yeah.
cover the last two?
Yeah, so action is where I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. This is where you actually like implement the thing that you've chosen together as the right way to address it. You know, so I think yeah, like this is just so dependent. It's hard to like say what action would look like. It just really I think depends on the conflict itself, the people. I mean, action could be, you switch
You
up
agree to
the
split a
team or you,
project.
you yeah,
Yeah.
you agree to do something different based on what the conflict was, or you might be as simple as like we yeah, we just agree to disagree. Like I don't know. It
Yeah.
depends. Um
Yeah.
but so analysis is the last step, and that is where you decide on you know the like like the reason that there was like this approach, and like does it need an ongoing process, like what's the maintenance of this,
Mhm.
like kind of like an analyzing, like versus just like okay we did it, now we're done. There's still like a step after that, like where you have to kind of like think through how it went and make sure that this is something we can avoid in the future. So those are the 5 A's that, if you were in a situation where, navigating something with a group of people outside of just something that you can like solve within yourself, which is like the next piece we're going to talk about, which is really like a lot of stuff. And I don't want to say like the majority or anything because I don't know, but like a lot of conflict is not something that the 5 steps would apply for. And it's more about internal assessment, and really that assessment piece, that first step is key here. And so just thinking more about, if you've assessed, like you would know that like this is something that I should be working on internally. For example, like we had posed some questions like about that you might ask yourself, so for to help you assess, like is it your stress that is causing whatever is going on. So like, is it something that you can address outside? Maybe it's something going on outside of work. So if you're really stressed because like you're something in your personal life, or like a relationship, or your physical health is causing stress in your life, and then that stress is causing
Definitely.
you to act a
Mhm.
certain way at work, that's not something you should be addressing using the 5 A's with
Yeah.
like someone else. Like, what you could do is probably like, if you've assessed that's why this is going on, letting people know. Like, you don't have to be specific about, my girlfriend broke up with me or whatever. Like, but you can tell them that it's something going on outside
Yeah.
of work and not related to them. So
Yeah, and
anyway,
I
yeah,
think this one's a tough one because typically if you've gotten to the point where you have conflict, then you're like very for sure that it is their fault. They
yeah,
they are the problem, right? And so
yeah, that's the tough part.
I think this one is a really tough one
Yeah,
because there are cases where somebody could have said or done something that we would maybe all agree is like, "Oh, that's a little problematic."
right.
However, when you look closely at how you're responding, the level of offense you're taking, right?
Yeah,
And just how hashtag unbothered you are by it, if you look closely, you might find that you are way more bothered by it
mhm,
than the level of violation is,
right,
and that's because you got some other stuff going on.
right.
Like bills are due, and your checking account does not have the amount in it that's going to
Yeah,
be needed to pay those bills, and so you're thinking about how late they're going to be and what fees you're going to have and all of that. Or like you said, you got just had a breakup, but a lot of
mhm,
times we have all this life stuff going on and we don't realize how it's impacting how we're showing up to other people, including not just how we act towards them, but how we're receiving how they're talking, how we're reviewing and perceiving how they're acting, and then how we're assessing that situation. And so this one's
right.
hard because a lot of folks just aren't really clear on how much, especially if you've been in a state of ongoing stress. So
Yeah,
if you live in a state, which many Americans do, where you essentially live check to check, you have normalized the stress that comes from living check to check, but you probably wouldn't realize that you're stressed because it's just how life is.
yeah,
Or if you've been in a really not so great marriage for 10 years and that funk that's in y'all's household has been there for so long, you don't even realize that bleeds off into how you show up to life because it's been going on for so long.
right,
So it's really hard to know when you have conflict with someone else, A, whether it's really a thing, B, whether how much of it is them and how much of it is how your reality is showing up
right.
and impacting how you're seeing the whole thing. So I think this one, man, I could go on this, but I just want to make sure you all think about the fact that don't quickly ask
Mhm.
yourself the question, what's going on here? Oh, yeah, it's obvious. Every time I see her, she rolls her eyes. Well, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah,
So if you're asking this yourself, is this the possible, could it be me? If you answer really quickly, you probably are not genuinely, accurately assessing what's going on here. With that being said, the second one we had, like, is this some stuff that y'all got into it in like 2 years ago or 6 months ago, and you felt like, oh, y'all were you were coming in and they pulled into the parking spot and you felt like they knew that you were pulling into that spot and they took it anyway. And so ever since then, even though nothing else has happened that would ever indicate that this person is problematic, you have already decided until the cows come home that this is a problematic person. And so because of that, whether they did or didn't, you're just holding on to it. And so every move they make, if they sneeze, you're like, see, that's what I'm talking about. That type of behavior right there is why we can't get
Yeah.
along, right? None
Yeah.
of you have ever done this, I'm sure. These are just creative stories that I came up with in my head just now. And then I think the last one we kinda had talked to through Lane is his
Yeah.
personality difference. And, when we were kicking this around, Lane, I was thinking back to how the first time I ever encountered, the DISC, and I can't remember, DISC. I just know I'm a D.
Yeah.
But I remember when I first encountered it and I did it with my team years ago, it was, like, so helpful. Like, "Oh, okay. That's why you're so, like, data driven and why,
Yeah.
when I get off into my little creative land, right, you are looking
Yeah.
at me like, 'Well, give me answers, give me deets,'" right? So it's like I thought about how many people in the workplace have encountered, like, these it's some sort of personality assessment, and so most people generally know, like, personality types and whatnot, but if you haven't done it recently, it's out of sight, out of mind, and so we tend to then have gone back to business as usual and just not able to bring that insight to the forefront so that, again, as I was saying in the "Is it you?" like, it could just be that you're different, and
Yeah.
that was, I think, one of the greatest, like, ahas I came out of that DISC assessment as a team years ago was like, we tend to, if someone's different than us, we tend to label different and problematic or wrong the
Wrong.
same.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, just because we're not alike does not mean that yours is wrong and mine's right, or that, you know what I mean? But, like, we just tend to, when things aren't the way we would do them or people aren't the way we are, we tend to assume that something's wrong with somebody else. And so just
Yeah.
if you haven't viewed those, you should, right? And then if you do, then you gotta kinda, like, do what you gotta do to keep that top of mind, because we again forget there are some explanations for some of these quote unquote conflicts. And again, to the point earlier, it's not really a conflict. It's just that we're different.
Yeah. I have an example of that actually for me.
Mm,
And this brings into the conversation another aspect of personality, which I don't even think this is necessarily personality, but it's a similar idea of the generational conflict that can happen in a workplace. So, a workplace is one of those kind of like interesting environments where people from multiple different generations come together on and try to accomplish like a similar task or a project
mhm,
together. And I think that, yeah, you don't normally do that in your personal life. I mean, you might like in your family have different generations, but like, when you're trying to, you're not usually around a group of people that has that much of a age difference. And I think it can lead to a lot of conflict. It does
mhm,
lead to a lot of conflict. And so, you know, when I think back on some conflict I've been a part of in the workplace, I doing the assessment piece, I may have ended on, this is a generational difference between
mhm,
me and this person. So for example, like I was I'm like this was probably 3 or 4 years ago and
mhm.
you know
Definitely not at Joy Society if this is a problematic story, because the work culture at Joy Society is amazing.
course, I would not what if I just did, like, throw out an exact example of
Yeah,
something
like last week, Liz, when
No, like, it was an office environment where I was the youngest, and there were a lot of baby boomer generation, and what is the one is there a generation below baby boomer? What
yeah,
do you
it's me,
are they?
Lane, Jesus. That's why I call us the forgotten ones. If
Gen
it
X,
wasn't for us, you wouldn't be here. Yes.
Gen X.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I just
Thanks
okay, 'cause
for
you're like
remembering me, Lane.
well,
You
okay, you
There
are
goes your bonus.
basically you're a Gen X millennial, but, anyway. So yeah, there was a big baby boomer population in this office, and so, like,
Mhm,
being, like, 2 generations, separated from them, there was a lot of assumptions made on both of our parts, and it did, like cause a lot of frustration for me. Like I think a lot of young people in offices might be able to relate to the fact of like anytime there was like anything technology related, it was just given to me, no matter if that was my skill strength or skill set or not, and like or something that I even like to do.
Mhm.
And so like there was also assumptions that like if someone else couldn't figure something out technologically, if they were like, especially of that generation, they would, it was like I was at their beck and call to like solve whatever problem, even though like I'm not a tech person and I actually don't know very much about this. I just Googled it 5 minutes ago, and like you probably could have done that too. So that caused a lot of frustration for me. It actually ended up being like a big part of my job. And so, you know, reflecting, I think this assessment piece, you can come to the conclusion that there's multiple things. So it's like there was the internal work of like, okay, this is a generational difference. How am I going to show up to this differently internally? But then there was also the fact of like, I think there was a place for a conversation that I didn't have because I am like pretty
Because you're a
avoidant,
conflict avoider.
because I'm conflict avoidant, but there was a place for a conversation that I should have had looking back, like,
Mhm.
you know, regarding like whether it was with the coworkers doing this or the leader, like probably both, probably a mix of both, you know, this is something I'm experiencing. Like, how can we work through this? Like, it doesn't seem fair. And truly, I think that that would have helped me feel better about my job. There are like things obviously that prevent you wanting to even bring something up, which is like if you don't feel like you're going to be at that job for very long, there's the idea that like, okay, like why cause a stir now? I'm going to be out of here soon enough. Or like,
Or
you know,
worried you're gonna get fired. I know that's a
or you know, and or worried about the retribution. I mean, that was a
Mhm.
fact there too, where it was like, you know, the older generation felt like they had a lot of like power in the organization and were had a lot of like kind of like personal ties with leadership. So like if I were to come in as this new person, and then there was also like the racial stuff too, where I was one of the only white people there, so it was like I don't want to like cause any problems. And I truly, like, looking back, I think there was a way to address it that would have been okay, but it also,
Mhm.
like, at the time felt like that wasn't my place and that I just needed to kind of like suck it up and do whatever was being asked of me, and if it was this, then I would just do that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good one, I think, especially in the world we're in now. So if you think about it, there's so many intersections of difference. You've got the generational component, you've got
Mhm.
racial differences within like US born people, but
Yeah,
then you've got global components, right? Where folks have
yeah,
are either working in the same office and they are not from US, people from US or working non-US, whatever, or
right.
remote. And I think even there's a remote culture that's like has its own thing. We
Yeah,
talk
that's
at
a
Joy
good point.
Society all the time. I don't know what's wrong with my team, but they swear there's this thing called Zoom fatigue, which I guess I'm a boomer because I've never felt it. Anyway, we do have a good culture. So we talk all the time, really, about not like all the time we're talking about our problems, but I really do try to facilitate a culture of communication and transparency and authenticity within our organization, and I think that that allows us to really enjoy working together even when we don't agree, or it also I think allows us to sacrifice at times, knowing that if you do have to sacrifice, but you know you're in a space where others are willing to sacrifice for you, and
Right.
when you look at the body of work, body, the overall experience within that team, or within the culture of the organization, you feel okay about the fact that like there are times where you give and there are times where you get. And so
Yeah.
hopefully you all have experienced that. If not, you should probably come work Joy Society. Anyway, no, but and I do want to call this out though as we neared the end. Let me just acknowledge all the people, because this is a thing. I've looked under the hoods of a lot of organizations as a consultant. And if you work at especially a big corporation that's been around for a while, there's a very good chance you're dealing with some really thick
Yeah.
funk in your organization. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that while we always are going to show up asking you what can you do as a solution, right? Because we only can control ourselves. I do want to acknowledge all the folks who are in workplaces that truly are toxic, truly are problematic, and say, I acknowledge you, I see you, I feel you. I'm not someone who's going to encourage you to just jump ship, because the reality is there's more organizations that are struggling from a workplace culture perspective than are not. So
Right.
I'm not big on promoting people to just dip, roll out just so you can go somewhere else. But I'm also never going to say that if you are in a space where the toxicity just never ends and there's really no end in sight, or no light in sight, I don't encourage for folks to stay in those
Right.
places. Now there may be cases where a different department maybe could relieve, but again, I will call out that if you haven't made any effort to communicate the challenges you're having, right? And you've just been the one who knows of all the problems, alleged
Yeah.
problems in your organization, and you've never attempted to be part of the solution. If you come to me as your coach, I'm not going to support any move that you would make, because I
You
would
need
argue
bring
there's
that
a
with
lesson.
you.
Yeah, there's a lesson for you to learn here, and you're going to leave the opportunity to do that. And even if you go to a really strong work culture type place like the Joy Society, does that mean it's all roses and we don't have moments where we do need to talk about things? No, we have them. But the reason why the culture is good is because we do talk about it, right? We do find a way and find the right time and find the right approach to expressing ourselves and identifying, what's going on, humbling ourselves, apologizing even if we didn't feel like we did anything wrong. It doesn't matter, the other person felt a certain way. And so you need that skill set, because if you leave your toxic culture and go to a place where the culture is great but you are the non-communicator, you'll be bringing some toxicity in, because you won't
Right.
be able to be part of the reason for the positive culture in that other workplace, because you haven't learned how to communicate and express yourself when you need to. So now you're the one marinating on drama from 2 years ago, and it's just everything that's a quote unquote problem is much bigger than it ever had to be. So
Right.
wanted to just call that out, because I do recognize there are some people truly suffering, and Lane and I, we've talked many times about former workplaces that we've been in and how absolutely draining, stressful,
Right.
depressing they have been.
Depressing, but
So,
and just like the
yeah.
burnout, if you're already and I mean, yeah, we didn't touch on this, but with helping professions too, if your work is already like you're at risk of burnout because you're working with people who are, experiencing crisis or experiencing their own types of difficulty, on top of that, for your organization to also have this kind of culture and the culture of burnout and the whole, for conflict to be such a prominent feature of the workplace, that's a recipe for like extreme fast track burnout, which is probably why I why I had burnout. One of the many reasons.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so hopefully this is helpful to you all. Again, I think this comes down to really pay attention to whether or not you are a facilitator of a person who says you hate conflict, but you low key really enjoy the entertainment of it. Check to see if it makes sense to engage. A lot of times, I'm big like the very first. If it's even remotely, sometimes it's just like, girl, let that go. But if it's a little more than a little of nothing, I'm going to talk about it right away, because I want
Yeah.
to keep that conflict juice very low. We don't want a
Right.
full tank. We do not want a full tank, and then we're going to talk about it. So, but
Right.
then
That's a good
also
point.
lastly, just think about where's your role, if any, right? If you have external crap going on that's causing you to show up a certain way,
Mhm.
if you just are someone who, you are not free of free you don't get a pass just because you're someone who doesn't talk a lot. Like
Right.
that doesn't make you not part of the problem. So for all my introverts out there who are the quiet ones, you can be a part of a problem even in being
Yeah.
someone who doesn't talk a lot. So I wanted to
Well,
call that
yeah, my last point will actually be that,
out.
we'll piggyback on that, which is, as an introvert, I have seen this, and not to call out my boyfriend, but we have related on this because we both do this, and it is something that I noticed as a pattern where I would become the person that was the listening ear for the various things that I was never really deeply involved in. I wasn't like causing things, but I was like enabling it by like being the like, everyone sharing their various things to me at this
Mm.
like central point. And it's
Mhm.
like, without even meaning to, I would like subtly hint at something that like they would take like this other person said, and then they would take it as like fact now because I'm like this conduit, and like it's almost like energetically even it just like enables the toxicity to continue. And so if you're just like even just like trying to be like a nice supportive coworker and listening to people vent because you want to like
Yeah.
provide that nice space for them, that's not doing what you think it
Yeah.
is.
Yes, girl. I remember
Yeah,
many,
that was a
many
big thing.
moons ago, you and I talked about that prior to your
Yes.
employment here. And I was
And
like,
that
oh,
was
damn.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that like I can point to at every job I've had. And I think a lot of more introverted people might end up in a role like that without,
Mhm.
so you don't realize that you're like fully a part of it. You think you're like just outside of this like drama because you're like, no, I don't contribute to it. I just listen. Okay, well
Mhm.
the listening is the problem.
Mhm. Or you are or people are really looking for communication from you to resolve a thing, and you don't talk at all, and so you say, well, I didn't offend
Yeah,
anyone because I didn't say
that's not
anything.
how I showed up, but yes, that's also
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
because then I can tell you I'm a person who's offended that I'm trying to talk something out with you and you're barely responding. Like
Oh yeah,
that's not a
that's
problem
almost
solving
worse.
response.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
like worse than
so
even just being like emotional about it. Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah. So anyway, hope this was helpful,
Yeah.
and hopefully these May showers will cleanse your conflict soul and you will move forward and be great as a lover of all the workplace